and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you on CGTN from Beijing. We begin today's program with the Taiwan issue. China has expressed strong opposition to a meeting held earlier this month between U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton and Taiwan's Security Chief David Lee. China reiterated that it is against any type of official exchanges between the U.S. and Taiwan, which is internationally recognized as an inseparable part of China. Take a look.
China cries foul over a meeting between United States National Security Advisor John Bolton and Taiwan Security Chief Lee Wei during Lee's trip to the U.S. recently. China on Monday voiced its firm opposition to official contact between the U.S. and Taiwan in any form and under any excuse.
China is extremely dissatisfied and resolutely opposed to this. The One China policy is the political basis of China-U.S. relations. We are against any form of official exchanges between the United States and Taiwan.
The One China principle is the bedrock of China-U.S. relations, something the Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lu Kang reminded the U.S. to keep. He said Washington should abide by the principles of the three China-U.S. joint communiques. But amid rising trade tensions between China and the U.S., Washington's apparently playing the Taiwan card. Last week, the U.S. military sent 2 Navy ships through the Taiwan Strait without permission from the Chinese government, which protested the affront to territorial sovereignty and regional peace and stability. American patrols through the Taiwan Strait have apparently increased in recent months. Earlier this month, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Taiwan Assurance Act of 2019 and House Resolution 273, reaffirming America's commitment to Taiwan and efforts to carry out the Taiwan Relations Act. The Pentagon also announced U.S. arms sale to Taiwan has reached more than $15 billion since 2010. The Chinese government warned Washington it would never give in on territorial sovereignty over Taiwan.
For more on Taiwan, we are joined in our Beijing studio, Zhong Houtao, researcher at the Taiwan Studies of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Also in Beijing, Einer Tangen, current affairs commentator coming from the U.S. Meanwhile, in Taipei, Joanna Lei, former legislator and chief executive officer of the Chenhua 21st Century think tank. Ms. Lei, let me have the first question for you. How optimistic do you think both sides are, both Tsai Ing-wen's team and apparently the Trump administration, at least some members of the administration? Ms. Lei.
Well, certainly they are quite optimistic in terms of building further relationship. If you look at what happened in the last couple of months, starting from passing U.S. domestic laws that gave Taiwan greater position as well as reaffirming the security guarantees to Taiwan, then later on you have joint military drills and exercises culminating to the most recent change of the name from CCNAA to Taiwan Council for U.S. Affairs. All of these are interpreted by Tsai Ing-wen's administration as a very strong U.S. support, and also by the U.S. counterpart as, I think, a gradual easing of the One China policy. It's quite a salamic tactic. It's slice by slice and bit by bit.
Interesting analogy over there. Of course, this is all happening with the context of a China-U.S. trade dispute, and there is an apparent deadlock. So both sides are trying to push the button, and yet this is a tactic or a strategy. That probably is the most important question, Mr. Tangen.
Well, you have to separate two parts of it. It's a tactics on behalf of Donald Trump. He's all about full pressure, you know, the art of the deal. He thinks he knows how to make China knuckle under, and this is part of it. But then you have a strategy by people like John Bolton, who should know better. He's a neocon. He deliberately wrecked the North Korean It talks by putting on his little thing, the Libya model and things like that, and he's doing his best to make things worse with Iran. So you have an individual here who really believes that military power of the U.S. should be used as a tool to get exactly what he wants. He wants the world to be remade with the U.S. at the center of it, basically vassal states with bilateral trades.
Right.
So differentiate the characters and you understand it. At this point, it seems that John Bolton is leading Trump around by the nose, and we'll see if that continues.
We'll see how long that will last also. Let's see. Let's go to Mr. Zhong here as well. Whether it is tactics or strategies, of course Beijing is alerted because Taiwan issue is the most important fundamental security issue for China, and it's also an issue of sovereignty as well. So Mr. Zhong, help us to understand what is Beijing thinking, even though the reactions coming from China's foreign ministry spokesperson, for example, Mr. Lu Kang, is very measured and balanced.
I think, just as you said, the Chinese mainland, as for Taiwan issue, I think it's highly related to China sovereignty and territorial integrity, and even to the Chinese people feelings. So we will do whatever we could do to defend our sovereignty and national territorial sovereignty. So in future, if the United States continue to take Taiwan issue as a bargaining chip to irritate Chinese mainland, I think the Chinese mainland, of course, just as Lu Kang said, we will take some countermeasures to defend our sovereignty.
Now, isn't that, Ms. Lei, understanding how the central government would react from the very beginning, that Ms. Tsai is putting Taiwan on a very dangerous path, that to become a bargaining chip between two important economies in the world, China and the United States, while knowing at any time this bargaining chip can be just thrown away into the air by Washington, which happened many times?
Well, certainly there is a clear divergence in terms of public opinions here. The political elites do play into the U.S. hands in terms of being a chip, a bargaining chip. But the business elites, especially the technology sectors, are highly cautious in terms of what would happen to Taiwan. Will Taiwan be receiving the short end of it and not getting any of the benefits in terms of an overall interest? So it is very, very clear that Taiwan is using the current U.S. support as a way to cement her next election.
Talking about elections, interesting election cycle in the Taiwan local election. Some of it coincides with that of the U.S. presidential elections, at least from now until the early 2020. Mr. Tangen, we all know during the campaign season, it is usually the most dangerous season when it comes to rhetorics, at least, and sometimes rhetorics could lead to even actions. So how dangerous are we from your perspective now if you look at the Taiwan issue?
Well, it's very dangerous. There's a lack of understanding, I think, on Donald Trump's part. He doesn't understand the very idea of sovereignty because, in one instance, he's complaining about any group activity, I mean, any group that the U.S. is part of, infringing on the U.S.'s ability to do exactly what it wants to do. And that's the attacks on WTO, NATO, etc., the United Nations. Then on the other hand, he's insisting that China change its businesses, its governance model, and also its definition of its lands. So it's something that just isn't there. So yes, expect this to be a very, very hot season for China as an issue, both on the military, sovereignty issues. Everything is going to be pulled out.
Right.
And unfortunately, it'll be both sides, both Democrat and Republican.
Ms. Lei, what's your judgment? Of course, I understand you are having a very difficult time right now in Taiwan because the political wind from the current one in governance is certainly very different ideologically from what you believe about Taiwan's future. But what about the discussion now taking place in Taiwan? Is it really a balanced discussion? Do different players and voices be heard about the real interests of Taiwan?
You know, I'm a little bit more optimistic than 4 years ago. Previously, even KMT's candidates tried to diverge, or they tried to Well, previously the KMT candidates tried to dodge the bullets and stay away from discussion of China, but the most recent candidates, both of the possible KMT candidates, are quite vocal in terms of Taiwan should have a strategy that will strike a balance. But the most important part is, in the past, the local politics talks about pro-unification or pro-independence. This time, they are changing and shifting the balance into pro-China versus pro-US. And I think this is a very carefully calculated strategy by Tsai Ing-wen, pushing KMT into a very difficult corner.
Is the KMT having its own strategies to dissolve this artificial dilemma Tsai created?
One of the candidates do have a strategy. He is he's redefining the topic to Sino-skeptic versus Sinophiliac. And this is a redefinition of putting everything into the same playing field. So I'm a little bit more optimistic because we have one candidate who is willing to face this issue head on.
Do you think so, Mr. Zhong? Are you more optimistic than 4 years ago, just as Ms. Lei?
Yes, I agree with Joanna in Taipei.
You're not just saying as out of politeness. We know the Chinese are always very polite toward one another and saying, I agree, but at the same time.
At least in the past 3 years, I think Taiwan people and especially the DPP has already fully realized that the importance of 1992 consensus. At least in future, the Tsai Ing-wen should at least do one thing, that is to freeze the Taiwan independence caucus. And if she could do in this way, I think that would be a great move. And if she could do in this way, I think the Chinese mainland will take some measures, and then the cross-strait relationship will become much better in future.
Yeah, since Ms. Lei earlier talked about the candidates, there are candidates now for the local election coming from really very different walks of life with very varied background. The issue about where China is going and how Taiwan is going to be related in its relationship with China does play a bigger role here out of a geopolitical change in the world. So, Mr. Zhong, besides what's going on between the mainland and Taiwan, there's a bigger picture certainly there. What do you think about that bigger picture and its impact on Taiwan?
And actually, most of the Taiwan people are thinking about this bigger picture, and that means what should Taiwan do in between Chinese mainland and United States. Most of the Taiwan people believe that Taiwan should keep a balance between the two sides. If the Taiwan authority take a side with the United States, that will lead to great crisis for Taiwan. I think that is the most popular idea in Taiwan. That means the KMT hold this kind of a balanced idea. But the DPP take the idea that Taiwan should take side with the United States. So if the DPP continue to take this kind of idea, I think most of the Taiwan people would worried about their idea.
Particularly, Ms. Lei, when trade and economic interests are involved, because we all know Taiwan very much focusing on its trade and economic prospect. But now, you see, even in the China-US trade dispute, Taiwan also, its name is being put on the map in a way. Take the example of chip makers and software makers. There are quite a number of big names based in Taiwan. So when there is so-called certain issues against the Huawei, those companies, they are forced to obey or not obey, being impacted or not being impacted by certain regulations and policies by the U.S. side. So, Ms. Lei, how do people see these latest developments, and how will they, in a way, sway their political understanding of the island?
Certainly, it's clear to say that all the major players are treading gingerly. They don't want to be the ones being used by the United States as sending a signal to China, nor do they want to give up the China market. As you know, Taiwan's economy is highly dependent on the bilateral trade with China. So all the major players that I've talked to are very careful in terms of not to express their opinions in an open way, and so that they can try to dodge the bullet once again from the U.S. I think the United States is quite dangerous in terms of its so-called long arm exercise of their judiciary power. And once they decided to do the long arm, including using their dominance in the financial sectors, in the economic tools, that all the major players in Taiwan are actually subject to very severe potential risk.
If you got the chance to talk to President Trump, how would you let him understand that the issue about Taiwan is not going to be a transactional issue when it comes to a trade discussion between China and the United States? Coming from you, someone live in Taiwan, you have your families in Taiwan, you grow up in Taiwan.
Well, I think I won't use reasoning or ration to talk to him into a new strategy, but I can easily tell him that the Chinese people suffered gravely during the war in the past. And since 1949, it took us a very long time to come to where we are, that cross-Straits we can have peace and co-development. So this is through the sufferings of many generations of many, many people. It's through the hardship and the blood and the sweat that we reach today's stage. And it is something to be treasured. Peace is something to be treasured. Peace and war should not be tempted easily, and peace should be treasured and guarded by all means.
Absolutely, beautiful said. What about for you, Mr. Zhong? You were born on the mainland.
Yes.
And yet you've been devoting decades of your life doing research about Taiwan and the Taiwan issue. You traveled to Taiwan many times as well. So if you got a chance to talk to President Trump, once again, I'm not sure when you were going to have a chance, but anyway, what are you going to tell him about why the issue of Taiwan should not be a transactional issue for the United States?
If I get this chance, I would tell Donald Trump a story about Li Denghui's visit in 1995 to United States. And so just because of Li Denghui's visit, that directly lead to the Taiwan crisis. And then here, that would fully show that the importance and sensitivity of Taiwan issue. And I should ask or urge President Donald Trump to realize this kind of sensitivity. And otherwise, if the United States continue to play Taiwan cards and take it as a bargaining chip to make Chinese mainland to make some compromises, I think this will directly lead Taiwan and both Taiwan and the United States to another crisis just about 20 years ago.
I see. Mr. Kangan, sometimes people play with fire without really know fire could burn down the houses. And a peace and war situation that both of our panelists coming from Taiwan and from the mainland talk about seems to be so far away from us. You know, when we talk about it in a peaceful studio here in Beijing, talking through satellites and things, everything is granted, and yet it's not. So, Mr. Kangan, what do you think is the nature of this Taiwan issue if you got a chance to talk to our international viewers?
Well, I tell them this is not something you compromise on. It's like walking into the United States and saying, oh, you know, we're going to separate Alaska and then take it, or Hawaii or something like that. This is sovereign integrity, right? This is not something that you just, you know, use as a pressure point because you think that you can get ahead. And it's a very serious issue. And this is the problem. I don't think that Donald Trump understands it. If I was talking to Donald Trump, I said, this is a no-win situation for you. All right? By doing this, you're playing, literally, as you said, with fire. And it could erupt into war. This is not something where China will give in on any sense. It's impossible. But making him understand that is another thing. And I think he's, as I said, ill-advised.
We'll see how things would evolve from here. But one of the things very important, since we're continuing our discussion, what's next? Ms. Lei, the election is coming up, so only half a year to go. It could be very dramatic. How do you think many on Taiwan Island are prepared for the dramas taking place, could be on the island and probably even beyond?
In the next week, actually on June 1st, there will be a mass rally in front of the current center of Taipei City, and one of the major players will be coming to Taipei. So once you are in Taiwan, you cannot but be dragged into all these excitements in terms of practicing a thriving democracy. However, there's something really dangerous. DPP has passed the first ever party-affiliated Central Election Commissioner. He is the first one with a very strong party affiliation. So we are very worried about whether this will be a free and open election. So we certainly plead for international observers to keep watching on Taiwan's practice of election.
On the other hand, what about from the KMT side? Do you think there are real strong candidates as we speak?
Well, I think we have a better chance than 4 years ago. And two leading candidates are both extremely strong candidates. If KMT doesn't hurt itself by internal conflicts, then either one of them could lead the KMT into victory. Not only because the candidates are strong, but also because Tsai's administration has exercised a lot of things, making her regime a totalitarian regime, and people are objecting to that.
Mr. Zhong, your thought about the different teams and the different campaigns taking place right now on the island?
Yes, I think KMT indeed has a good chance to win the next election, because according to any kind of the public opinion poll, both Han Kuo-yu or Guo Taiming takes about 50 or even much higher approving rate. But the Tsai Ing-wen's approving rate is only about 20 or 25. So for this, I think KMT indeed has a good chance.
No matter what it is leading up to the local election, and then of course the U.S. have its own election October next year. Mr. Tangen, how do you think people should really in the United States see the issue of Taiwan? Because I'm not sure many people would really understand all of these nuances of history. You've been here in China for a long time. What exactly is the nature of this issue, if you got a chance?
Well, it's, as I said before, it's about sovereignty, and this is just a last desperate political move by Tsai Ing-wen to stave off what is in essence a disastrous 4 years. She has not been able to move the needle economically, and this is her last hope to use this card to vault her back in.
All right. Well, I guess we're already running out of time for this round of discussion. I want to thank the three of you for joining us and providing your insights. Joanna Lei joining us from Taipei, Zhong Haotao, Einar Tangen here in Beijing. Thank you so much for your opinions and insights.